of these days, Kavita Srivastava will not need an introduction. But I think that time has not yet come. I better tell you a few words about Kavita as yet. She's the National General Secretary of the People's Union for Civil Liberties. And she cut her teeth as an activist working initially on gender issues. And subsequently, she has been involved in the Right to Food campaign in Rajasthan. I have known Kavita now for close to 26, 27 odd years. And last year when I was interviewing students with Rohit Dhankar, I would look at a student and I would say, "Arey, ye Kavita hai." You know, I see qualities of Kavita in her. You know. So she's become a sort of benchmark for me in which I look for qualities in students and human beings. So I just would like to request Kavita to come and talk to us today on state and dissent.
Friends, I'm not used to formal lectures at all. Let me tell you, I'm out of that framework of existence, because as a full-time activist who's heavily into casework and we never get the time to sit back and reflect and put down something which can be like called a lecture. So I'm not going to give you a lecture, though it's called a series of lectures or something. It's going to be very much sharing some experiences and also slightly interactive. I'd like to also get some questions. So when Chandan asked me what I wanted to talk on, so I gave him 3 options. I said it could be legislating the Right to Food Act, which has not happened. For the last 4 years, we've been struggling. I could talk about that. Yesterday, the parliament adjourned, sine die. I could also talk on the new sexual assault and rape legislation and the whole subtext. You know, I mean, the 1980-81 rape movement, anti-rape movement, and then the Bhavri Devi anti-rape movement, and now this, what we just saw post-Nirbhaya. I said I could also talk about that. Or I could talk about criminalizing dissent. And in the context of, you know, how PUCL has gone into struggle areas. So he finally settled for the 3rd. Now, I don't know why. We didn't, probably the other 2 have been discussed and talked a lot. So he thought probably it's better. So actually, the dissent is everywhere, you know. And in all the 3, our positions have been, in a way, our campaigns' positions have been dissenting positions. So it's interesting to understand how dissent, by and large, gets criminalized. So friends, I think you're very lucky to be sitting within a university framework which appears to be very protected. But actually, what is being criminalized today is to hold views. So don't think that you're protected for long. You may well, the Indian state apparatus has strengthened and armed itself so much that it won't be too late when, because holding views different from what the government thinks is actually committing a crime these days. I mean, we are actually standing almost on that position, and that is what I'm going to talk to you. And this is not a perception as a human rights activist. It's the perception of all those people who are trying to speak differently, and they are masses. They're really masses all over the country, and the largest critique is coming from struggle areas where, as all of you know, the largest struggles are happening over land, forests and water, and where people are holding different views, there's no other option but to be seen as anti-state and very quickly to be seen as a Maoist. And on the other side, who else has no right to hold different views? I think the other community of people, and they are again in several millions, are educated Muslim professionals, and they are very quickly, I mean, if you see what's happening, if one tries to just look into the profile of all those who get arrested in the name of being terrorists, you know, increasingly it's moving away from big towns, like they're no more from Delhi and Lucknow and other big cities like Bombay. I mean, that was tried in the 90s and early 2000. Now they're all from small cities that you've never heard of, like Beed, Darbhanga. And if you go a little, you see that these are the, I mean, what is happening out there, we don't know. What's happening in these cities, we don't know. But generally, these are the strong voices, as we have seen, that a large section of Muslims and then families start getting criminalized in the name of being terrorists. So the largest number of people who are actually under threat are, you know, these days in the name of Maoism, in the name of terrorism, and actually even otherwise. I mean, it's spreading so much. I mean, almost every other day we get to know of another set of activists who are under the glare of the Indian state apparatus. It could be the police anywhere, it could be the administration, and somewhere total use of brute force to subvert the basic freedoms and the right to life and liberty, which are contained in Article 19 and 21 of the Indian Constitution. I mean, that is what is happening. And again, I don't want to sound alarmist, but this is increasingly becoming a reality. And Karnataka has just seen a shift in power, electoral power. Now, after 10 years, you got the Congress back. You had the JDS, you had the BJP, and now you have the Congress back. I don't think anything is going to change. Maybe just a bit. I mean, I come from a state where we alternate between BJP and Congress, and the communal question is a key question. The Congress never suppresses communal forces, and the communal elements are pretty active even while the Congress is in power, in fact, sometimes more active. While the BJP, when the BJP is in power, the only difference is that when the BJP is in power, they get into all the institutions. They put in all their people, they put in, I mean, they work structurally and institutionally, they take over land. I mean, not that the Congress is not involved, but they do more. So you may not see overt communal activity while the BJP is in power. You see it at a very sinister level. They get in. So not much changes we have seen between the Congress and the BJP. So I don't think what I'm saying, what I'm going to be addressing actually is going to change. With this change in government from this side to that side, I don't think there's going to be much change. I don't want to sound cynical, I don't want to sound alarmist, but I think if this is not brought center stage within an academic framework, where you're developing ideas, where you are trying to bring people together to hold views. What else is an academia? What else is a university? It is supposed to train people to hold views, and they must know why they're holding views. Please remember that whole thing is under threat. I want to share a few, illustrate this through a few examples, how dissent is criminalized, and I want to talk about some of the draconian laws, though the experts are sitting here from ALF, and I think they should be talking to you about these draconian laws because they are lawyers. I'm just an activist who's learned about them through a lot of work that they have done. And then, of course, conclude as to what can we do, because since there are so many youngsters, and the whole idea about coming here was to see how this can become integral to their own process of growth and their choices in life, how this can be something integral to their growing up. And we are glad that we've had in the past, we've had opportunities of having interns from Azim Premji University last year, as well as in the summer, in the winter. And surely we try to even get them to engage with very basic things. So very quickly first about the PUCL, because a lot of you will not know, very quickly. People's Union for Civil Liberties is the oldest national organization and the largest. I don't want to talk about being largest in some sense that, you know, we are very proud of it. It's just that we happen to be one of the, because after that there was no effort to build a national organization of that nature. And this process goes back to the 70s. I don't think you people know, you know about the Arvind Kejriwal anti-corruption and the Anna Hazare anti-corruption movement. But in the 70s, some of the seniors sitting here would know that Jaiprakash Narayan, I'm sure have you heard about him, I hope. Jaiprakash Narayan, otherwise just Google and get to know, Loknayak Jaiprakash Narayan, who actually challenged Indira Gandhi with her corruption that began with his movement began in Gujarat and then moved it spread like fire to Bihar. And in order to stop that anti-corruption movement, which brought the entire opposition together, even related to her own election, which was challenged in the Allahabad High Court. Subsequent to that, Mrs. Gandhi was left with no other choice. If she had to stay in power, then she imposed something which is out now of the Indian Constitution. At that point, there was this power of imposing an internal emergency where Article 19 and Article 21 actually don't exist. So she used her powers. She got the president. Obviously, the president had to sign it. So the president signed it on the dotted line. And of course, that judgment was also upheld by none other than Justice Krishna Iyer, and it was a bench of some other judges. And of course, and there was also another bench of judges. So it was later upheld. The emergency was justified, that it was in the Indian Constitution, it could be invoked, except that the emergency saw the entire opposition. You know, first time after independence, you saw a sea of dissenters and all those who were in the opposition thrown in, and that time the opposition was from everywhere. It was from the universities, it was within the bureaucracy, it was from all services of the government. I mean, leave alone from the political parties, it was all over, because lots of university people also went into jail, which you don't see anymore. Nowadays, the universities are devoid of any kind of political understanding at the cutting edge level. But at that point of time, how could Article 19 and 21, how could people be deprived of it? So there was a lot of challenge even in universities. So everybody was thrown into jail. So so that time it was realized that basically you need post-independence. So the first time it was realized that you need a civil liberties and a democratic rights movement. And although in 1932 there was a civil liberties union. Also there is, when you go into the history of civil liberties in India, you do come across during the freedom struggle some sort of civil liberties union in which Nehru was a part of pre-independence, but there's not much that we know. But later, when the entire group in the jail was seized with this matter, Loknayak Jaiprakash Narayan called Justice Tarkunde, who by then had, and asked him to move to Delhi from Bombay, and asked him to set up this organization. So this organization was born as PUCLDR, People Union for Civil Liberties and Democratic Rights. And he was the president, and Krishna Kant, who later became the vice president of India, was the first general secretary of PUCLDR, and you had everybody like Vajpayee and George Fernandez and many others. So after 77, when Indira Gandhi lost very badly, and everybody from the PUCL was like in government, holding various positions. So obviously the PUCL could not exist any longer. So that time there was this debate, do you need a PUCL kind of organization? Because now civil liberties have been restored, so probably we don't need one. But there was still a debate happening, and very soon by 1980, over some questions, including the question of whether Justice Tarkunde should have given a statement on Soviet troops rolling into Afghanistan, the PUCL-DR split into two organizations called the PUCL and the PUDR. Now, the PUDR, the more radical left groups went into PUDR, and the PUDR is Delhi-based. So, predating PUCL, which is a national organization, you did have CPDR, Committee for the Protection of Democratic Rights in Bombay, APDR, Association for the Protection of Democratic Rights in West Bengal, post, the Siddharth Shankar Ray attack in the name of nationalism. You did have APCLC in Andhra Pradesh. So it wasn't that PUCL was the first human rights organization, but since the late 60s and early 70s, human rights organizations had begun happening. But PUCL is the first national organization after 1980. So we have, at that point of time, you have judges, you have journalists. So PUCL had as its first general secretary Arun Shourie, who was that time not yet, he had not shown his true colors. So he is the general secretary of the PUCL, and Justice Tarkunde continued. And after, in 1984, when the horrible Sikh genocide happened in Delhi post the murder of Indira Gandhi, where 3,600 people were killed in Delhi. It was very interesting to see Professor Rajni Kothari, who that time was a very big political scientist, who was the president of the PUCL, call PUCL and PUDR together and say, listen, I mean, these issues are larger than our whatever views on certain things, we must work together. So you have, a joint report, which is the only report. Like by the time the Gujarat genocide happened, I mean, in our hands only, we got about 70 reports. There must have been over 100 reports, Every citizen organization was going and giving its report. I mean, we got the English reports. Surely there were many in regional languages, which you didn't get. There were over 70 reports. But PUCL, PUDR, joint study of who are the guilty, there's only one report. And even those particular cases for which you must have been reading, I don't know, with Sajjan Kumar ought to have been convicted, this Congress leader who led the killings, in the places. So Rohit is another old friend. So basically PUCL came out of a backdrop of, emergency, Indira Gandhi, and that time the kind of opposition, the kind of leaders in public life that you had were very different from what you have today. Like, I mean, the people who wanted the entire media, that time took positions, clear-cut positions. So you had a lot of media people in the PUCL. You had a lot of judges, retired judges, not sitting judges, retired judges in the PUCL. You had a lot of theory people, like amongst the founders of the PUCL, you had U.R. Ananthamurthy, Girish Karnad from this very city, and along with Nikhil Chakravarti and many others. So PUCL has got a very grand kind of history. But of course, over the years, PUCL has changed a lot. It consists of a lot of ordinary people like me, and a lot of, it's gone into areas in districts and blocks in several states. I mean, the structures that you can have block units, you can have city units, you can have district units, you can have state units. It's very decentralized. As long as anybody believes in the constitution of the PUCL. So you could be from left to right, whatever be your ideology. You can also be from since a lot of political party people had formed the PUCL, so you can also be of a political party that you can come into the PUCL, except that not more than 10% people from political parties can be on the executive. They cannot be office bearers. That's left to independent people. So PUCL everywhere in every state has taken its own the state's human rights context has got the PUCL to emerge differently in different states. So we are supposedly in over 20 states, but we are struggling with our own contradictions in various states. And actually we are very small. We appear to be very spread out, but we are very, very small. So a lot of our work is in alliance with a lot of other people, and those are some of the struggles that I'm going to be sharing. So if there are any other questions, Chandan felt I must talk about the PUCL. I thought that was not important. He said, no, you must tell about PUCL. And of course, there are lots and lots of cases of the PUCL. In fact, nowadays, the whole of PUCL has, for the Indian state apparatus, in the various state governments and the police, they think we are Maoists, you know. We are protectors of terrorists, we are Maoists. So then we also, you know, market ourselves. So then we begin with the PUCL case dating back to 1980 or something. We have a series of cases where there have been judgments from the Supreme Court and the High Court. Lots and lots of litigations, including the one on right to food, where, I mean, Purnendu used to be a member of the Rajasthan PUCL and I used to be the General Secretary, and collectively we had all done a case on the right to food, which for the last 12 years continues since 2001. So lots and lots of cases in the Supreme Court, in the various high courts, that the PUCL does, along with a lot of activism and fact-finding reports. You know, I mean, you begin objectively by going and looking at a situation. Of course, you will take sides. Your report ought to take sides. After all, you must say whether, you know, violation, whether there are any human rights violation. Agar goli chali to chalni thi ya nahi chalni thi. A lot of encounters, a lot of police firing, and a lot of other, you know, situations, custodial killings, and beyond that also now increasingly with struggles for land, water, forest, livelihoods, very different kinds of reports are coming out, along with human rights violations of a whole other section like transgender and others. You know, the different kinds of reports that the PUCL addresses almost everything, you know. So, and we also think that you know, human rights violations are intrinsic and essential and will continue till actually, you know, the directive principles of state policy don't actually become guarantees. Till then, you are going to continue to have all kinds of violations, you know, in one sense, you're going to continue. So I want to, what I was stating earlier, how holding views is criminalized, and holding views and expressing it on a platform. I want to begin with something that is very close to you, which is Kudam Kulam. Now, you know, there was a judgment just 2 days ago by the Supreme Court, which in some sense marginalized all the questions of the people which were raised, the questions that the people were raising, that whole voice, that is the Kudam Kulam nuclear plant safe? Have enough measures been taken to ensure safety? In the best case scenario of Fukushima in Japan, we saw what happened, and there was so much of radiation and you know, causing so much of havoc. And we also, there have been histories of fallout of you know, radiation from nuclear power plants, Chernobyl and many others, and these go on generation after generation, they don't finish, and we know information just gets suppressed. Even in the best case scenario, the information gets totally suppressed, because every nuclear program is secret, and no government actually gives out the right thing, and people's access. You know, even independent nuclear scientists can never enter. I mean, for the last 40 years, Indian nuclear scientists have been saying, independent ones, have been telling the establishment, let us go into your plants and let us look at all the, you know, nuclear reactors. I mean, I also come from a state where Rawat Bhata, which is one of the oldest nuclear power plants, and it has 5 nuclear reactors. And we constantly have such serious problems. So this time when the International Safety Council did come looking into these issues, they never looked at the reactors from which the problems are happening. They looked at the first and the second reactor. They never looked at the third and the fourth. So where do you go? Where do you go when workers, you know, have a problem, or people living around have a problem? Where do you go? To date, there has been no measure on where to put away the waste, the nuclear waste. Where will you put it? Just now, it's all being stored in various plants because it's high density waste. So there were some very, very critical and serious issues that the entire Kudam Kulam struggle against the nuclear power plant, which is not recent. It has been there for the last 12 years. I mean, we've been participating in it for the last 12 years because ever since India went nuclear, we have been looking at, of course, disarmament issues and nuclear weapon, the entire weapons program of India, but we've also been looking at nuclear energy issues. So with this, when the people raised this issue, there was a crackdown. Now, there was a totally different government, the AIADMK. It has nothing to do with UPA, to the dream project of the Prime Minister to, to get all these nuclear energy instruments from all over the world and to get uranium to come out of, the entire blackout that India had was going through. So to bring it out of that is Manmohan Singh's pet project. So what happens? The people were struggling peacefully. Nobody had a single weapon with them. There aren't even too many stones if you're around a beach. And what happened? There were 200 cases of sedition and waging war against state. Now you must know that the law of sedition remains. The law of sedition is actually the principle around which thousands of laws happen, draconian laws, what you call anti-democratic laws. In 200 such cases against sedition where you have it is causing disaffection against government, if you're questioning government, causing disaffection against government, and you have a right to cause disaffection against government within an electoral framework, if you had an election, if the Congress would not have critiqued the BJP's policies or the JDS would not have critiqued the BJP's policy, would you, that is what is critiquing and causing disaffection against the government. Only then can you, state your point. Now, causing disaffection against government, you can get a life sentence, which Binayak Sen got. Binayak Sen was given a life sentence for holding views and causing disaffection against government, which of course they had no proof still, it was a case. So 200 such, and waging war, please remember, waging war is considered a more sinister crime than sedition, and you can get a death sentence. So 200 cases just against waging war and sedition, and of course the Use of Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, which is sinister. It's gone through 3 generations, and lots of those cases also. And 1,200 other FIRs were lodged against people for obstructing governmental work, for trespass. Concretely, there were only 15 cases where there was some instance that a stone was thrown, or some sort of such disruptive activity. The rest of the FIRs only say that, Manmohan Singh, down, down, we are against the nuclear policy. This is what is written in the text of the FIR, that the people were shouting slogans against Manmohan Singh, and they've actually written this, Manmohan Singh, down, down, and, similar statements against the government, against the policy, and all this becomes seditious. And you have, at the moment, more than 20,000 people who, some people say 60, but the PUCL lawyers who are looking after this whole thing, they told us that about 20,000 with a core of 600 people, 600 absolutely ordinary activists who are charged directly with all these cases, and about 20,000. It goes on to 20,000. It doesn't stop at 20,000. It can extend, because in others at any point of time, you can, even 15 years later, open FIRs, as we are seeing in Gujarat. They've opened FIRs of 1989, of 1990, 91, and picking up people in the name of Maoism. That time there were young students who may have been with the ML movement, but actually, they've then booked in cases since 1989. All the acts get seditious and everything. So it's a scary scenario, what you see in Kudankulam. So if the Kudankulam judgment of the Supreme Court was almost something like this, that in the national interest, if there are minor inconveniences being caused to people, that will have to be overlooked, because in national interest, you have to sacrifice these minor inconveniences. And it has told the government that you ought to ensure that there is sufficient security. Either they should have given guidelines of opening it or something, gone a little ahead of, to look at security. And all this was placed, because whenever a lawyer goes into court, if plan A doesn't work, at least plan B would work. Of course, we knew the Supreme Court is not going to stop the Kudankulam plan, but at least it could have given a whole regime on how to ensure safety, security, some guidelines, like it did say in sexual harassment at workplace. We don't want to go to the Supreme Court for policy, but it could have given some guidelines, but nothing like that. And on these cases, it is said that the government ought to look into these cases, and perhaps, it's not use the word false case or something, but said a lot of people have been charged and booked under various sections, and the government ought to look into it. Now, this is what you get from the apex court to a struggle which is absolutely unarmed, where the whole struggle has been declared seditious and waging war against the Indian state. So you can understand what is happening. The Supreme Court of India doesn't take a serious stand on this. We don't know if individual cases come up to the Supreme Court, whether they're willing to give a law or something on that. But in this big petition in which everything went, they refused to take a stand. So in one sense, it strengthens all the lower courts who refuse to give bail. When people get booked under some of these sections, it for 2-3 years, they're just not going to get bail. In fact, it takes much longer, 4 to 5 years also. We know these days that anybody, my own fear, 2 years ago, the police came to arrest me also. The Chhattisgarh police with 150 Rajasthan policemen came to arrest me in Jaipur. At 6 in the morning, they surrounded the house. They came to pick me up that I was shielding a Maoist woman in my house. Of course, they went around and they got nothing. I was not even there. They got nothing. They had egg on their face. But for 2 years, it's almost 2 years, the fear that, never know when my file has now been opened by, as they say it in local language. अब आपकी फाइल खुल गई है. आपको कभी भी गिरफ्तार किया जा सकता है. आप छत्तीसगढ़ मत जाइएगा. I was told where I was going regularly. So this kind of terror and fear that, because they have the tools in terms of laws where they can just take you in any time. Similarly, any other struggle, you turn around, look at any of the struggle. See POSCO. There's a report done by Alternative Law Forum. I won't go through it. But just to tell you that this is the latest report on the number of cases on people. What are these people saying? These people have traditionally done pan ki kheti. If the Indian pan is exported all over the world, it's because of these pan vineyards in places like where in Dinkia villages, where the entire POSCO plant has to come. Now they don't want to give their 50,000 such pine vineyards. It's huge. It's a huge economy of that region. People want to exist with that. They don't want POSCO. Now, and what is it that the Indian government is giving to POSCO? It's actually the most scary part. You must know that the largest players in iron and steel these days are the Japanese. They're the largest. And their steel is supposed to be the best. Then comes Korean, and then the Chinese. And China gets the largest in terms of a lot of illegal mining and a lot of, right from the top, that's a major scam which one day should open. Now, people everywhere are struggling against all this. So what has POSCO got? POSCO has an office in the Prime Minister's office. It's a Korean company. It has an office in the Prime Minister's office. And so you can see how the Indian state is actually totally guarding corporate interests against the interest of the people, against the interests of policy that the people may want. They don't want this kind of takeover of the land. So what does POSCO get? POSCO gets an entire harbor. There's a new port for POSCO. Although Paradeep is underused, not even a third of it is used. They could use Paradeep, no. They're going to get a new harbor. So then you need a harbor road. So a whole lot of displacement from the harbor to this place where the steel plant is going to come up, the POSCO steel plant. And then from another district 150 kilometers away, you're going to be transporting the ore for making of the steel. Now, everything they're getting it, and the government of Orissa is really like the government of POSCO. And continuously, they have been, even just now, they're like amne samne. There's again, because the people have decided we are not going to leave this place. The women and children and men all do satyagrah. And this is something that we were talking in the morning earlier. It's not just that the Maoists have used children, you know, in their movements. Children somewhere become an integral part of every movement. And they become the front of every movement. You know, if whether, a good, bad, whatever, it's something that we have to understand, you know. You have these, when you go to the POSCO area, lots of children who will swear that, you know, hum to yahi jiyenge, little children. हम तो यही मरेंगे, हम यहाँ से हटेंगे नहीं. They've learned the whole language, and every day the children go and do a dharna along with their mother, father, everybody. So something like POSCO also against the interest of the people of that area. Similarly, Vedanta. You know, I mean, you could just go on and on. In the 3 states of Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, and Orissa, which is 85% of our mineral wealth in these 3 states, you can understand how at every point where people are questioning, it's very easy to label them Maoist because there is a Maoist movement in that area. So it's very easy to label them Maoist, and they go into jails. I had a chance when this was in 2011, February, when 5 CRPF policemen were abducted by the Maoists in Narayanpur area in one district of Chhattisgarh. They sent a message to all of us saying that we only want human rights groups to come and get them released. So so this was a first kind of opportunity to come face to face with a Jan militia, the People's Liberation Army of the Maoists, or the Jantana Sarkar that they run. I mean, this is the first time I had any experience. So, of course, the guns are silent on both sides. When we went to this area, Raman Singh government of Chhattisgarh assured us that the guns would be absolutely silent. And of course, actually it's a pity. It's like in Kashmir, the Indian army, which is in a state of paranoia and panic, you know. I mean, even though there was supposed a message was passed that in so-and-so jeep, and of course, nobody knew where to go. We were told, it is all like, you know, film. You are told that at 11 o'clock, once somebody calls you up in the night and says that, okay, now you've reached, tomorrow at 11 o'clock, we'll tell you which village to come to pick up the people. Then at 11 o'clock, they give you not the village, they give you some neighborhood village. So you go into the wrong direction. We kept going into wrong directions, kept hitting mountains and would come back. Anyway, somehow, we managed to get there after walking 26 kilometers one way. Of course, we took with us all the families, you know, all the family members of the 5 CRPF men. We took a lot of media so that, you know, it's up front. Whatever we are doing, it's absolutely transparent. So when we went, so we asked, there's a young commandant, a very young girl, she must have been 20, 21, who was leading this whole thing, who had abducted these 5 CRPF men, which was under her leadership that these 5 CRPF men, very young girl, and she was conducting everything. And very quickly after the Bharat Milap, where families and the CRPF men met each other and they made their speeches, that first time they realized, you know, the actual condition of what is happening inside. We had Swami Agnivesh with us also. So of course, so the moment the other meeting began, why? We asked them, why have you called us? They said, we wanted some of you to come and hear actually what's happening inside. So we will take a back seat, you hear it from the people themselves. Now, I mean, these are people who have a right, even under the Indian state, not to be harassed. Now, story after story, I mean, of course, Swamiji, a lot of them given touched Swamiji's feet. So obviously, I mean, they were not Maoists, they wouldn't be touching his feet, surely. Anyways, but story after story, all the people who had gathered, who were in hundreds, I mean, they had not seen for 4 years, 5 years, 3 years. They didn't know where, which jail their kin were, their husbands or brothers or sisters or wives. They didn't know at all. So, we kept documenting story after story in the darkness also. We kept documenting, and very late in the night we left. We had to again walk back 26 kilometers, come to a point where the cars were. And the moment we came out, till now the Sarkar is not there, Raman Singh Sarkar. The moment we came close to the main road, suddenly they surrounded all of us, and they actually abducted from us the 5 CRPF men so that we could not produce them in front of the media. We had a big fight. but we, of course, they wouldn't allow us. But to cut a long story short, when we try to examine, Jagdalpur is the biggest city in that area, and we try to examine. Now, I mean, it was crazy that this is jail strength in 2011. Of under trials was 5 times more. Of convicted prisoners was 3 times more. We have all those figures. And now it's grown even disproportionate. The most recent report shows, so you can actually, I mean, what I'm now trying to say, that in Kudamkulam, the people who went into jail took legal recourse, may have got bail, came out, but if you are a tribal and you're picked up from any of these areas, I mean, nobody even knows which jail you are in. You lose all your legal rights, and it's when other women prisoners go into the jail, they write to you and tell you, they will send messages कि यहाँ तो इतनी लड़कियाँ हैं. Like Soni Sori, you may have heard of her case. Soni Sori has been writing back and giving stories of the number of women who don't need to be there. You know, भाई नहीं मिला तो चलो बहन को ले चलो, पति नहीं मिला तो चलो पत्नी को ले चलो, बेटा नहीं मिला तो चलो बाप को ले चलो, भाई मतलब इस तरीके से they've just picked up people and they've gone into jail. So once this kind of thing happens, this kind of repression, there's no sunwai, where will these people go? Who will they go to for justice? And the media also, I mean, the media in these states, Chhattisgarh, Orissa, Jharkhand, slightly different, refuses to give a different voice, refuses to represent. In fact, the media told us very clearly, we said, why did you call us from Delhi? Y'all should have done it. So they said that the last time when 2 policemen were abducted, they had gone to get these 2 policemen, then, and similarly, like they came up to the main road. So then the police surrounded them and they said, no, listen, yeah, we are media persons. You can't snatch away these 2 CRPF. No, you have to hand over to us. But they fought and took them away. Then there were so many cases against the media persons by the Chhattisgarh police, and one really infamous IG, Kalluri, who raped. I mean, there is a case that the PUCL took up to the NHRC, Ledha's case, a very tragic case, this Kalluri. I mean, it's so tragic. I'll just take 2 minutes to tell you. I mean, I didn't come to talk to you about Ledha's case, but just to tell you how ordinary, like this woman Ledha, she went up, one day some men came to her and told her that, you know, your husband is what does your husband do? She said, वो तो एक मजदूर है. She said, नहीं तो वो मजदूर नहीं है, वो तो नक्सलाइट है. तुम उसको शाम को आए तो आप उसको कहना कि थोड़ा सा थाने में आ जाए, थोड़ा पूछताछ करनी है और उसको ज़रूर लेके आना. So she convinced her husband, who should never have gone, if by any chance he was connected. Anyways, he went in the evening. So he obviously denied, I am not a Maoist. We don't know what his location within the whole thing was. What he was, we don't know whether he was a Maoist or not a Maoist. And then, since he was not telling whatever they wanted to ask, they raped Ledha in front of the husband and then shot the husband. And then Ledha was left in a terrible state. Of course, she goes back, and then even today she's trying to fight that case. So that matter PUCL had taken up, Binayak Sen before his arrest, had taken up to the NHRC, which NHRC completely poo-pooed and said there was no such thing, though the PUCL fact-finding showed evidence that there was rape. I mean, the way where the shoe was located and where the trousers were and where this, that, I mean, they have a proper report. So this Kalluri, this same Kalluri had harassed the media. So the media this time told the Maoists that we are not going to at all, participate in any of your releases. You call somebody else. So then they said, okay, then we thought might as well call national human rights organizations so that you can tell the world about the kind of atrocities that we are facing. So now to declare all tribal people who have not gone into, of course, Salwa Judum may have been banded. I don't know if you know of this process. Surely you would know that the government tried to sanitize all the tribals by beginning this counter program of arming some tribals against other tribals in the name of Maoism, and all those who didn't come in. They evacuated 600 villages, and all those who didn't come into that fold and ran away into the villages, crossed the Indravati and went on the other side, were declared Maoists. Now, it's actually being caught in the crossfire. It's not that these people agree with that ideology, want to give legitimacy, but that space, that situation, totally seems that that there can be no voice. You know, there can be no other voice. You are either Maoist or you are government. So and the worst kind of law that Chhattisgarh has, of course, you have the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, which I'll talk a little more, but they have a Chhattisgarh Jan Suraksha Adhiniyam, special Chhattisgarh Vishesh Jan Suraksha Adhiniyam. Under this law, even your, I mean, in fact, what you're thinking, your views, everything, I mean, it gets criminalized, you know, it's under the law, aapki niyat, you know. So, I mean, how can they know? How is that any substance within criminal law that they know, you know, they have brought in a law where they can just simply say, I think we know what he wants to do, you know. So they've brought in laws that should actually, can never be part of the Indian legal framework. They will never stand through Article 19 and Article 21, you know. So, but that law exists, Chhattisgarh Vishesh Jan Suraksha Adhiniyam. It's like the, it's like the law under which Bhagat Singh went, you know, the Public Safety Act of the British. It's a very, very similar law which criminalize any kinds of holding of views and everything. So, so under this law, which we have challenged, I mean, we went to the Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court, it doesn't want to, the Supreme Court, in one way has accepted the idea that it doesn't want to interfere with, you know, with any of these laws. They feel that let these laws be legislated by various state assemblies and the parliament. So when we went to the Supreme Court, we said that we brought it to the Supreme Court because we know that the High Court will not address this. And we know that lower courts and high courts are absolutely manipulated. I mean, all these people who are in Bastar jail, how can they exist in jail? We all know that there is always a judge who's in charge. You know, the judges are made in charge of jails in every state, and all the prisoners who are in a jail, you know, you have to be in judicial custody. If you're in judicial custody, which means some court has put you in custody in that jail because the court doesn't have any room. The court takes, you know, the jail as its space to put its people. So if you go there, every 15 days, the court has to meet you. But the courts also refuse to have any kind of interface or interaction with any of these people. So therefore, you know, people remain for days together in these various jails. So at the lower court level, there is just no questioning. At the high court level, like the Chhattisgarh High Court, there's just no questioning at all. In fact, the Chhattisgarh High Court, when the Supreme Court refused to hear us, when we went to challenge Chhattisgarh Special, Public Safety Act, so they told us, the Chhattisgarh High Court told us, well, now the man has been released, meaning Binayak Sen. So why are you challenging this? We said, no, there are 225 other prisoners. This was in 2009. Well, of course, that list has grown. So they said, well, they've not dealt with that case. I mean, it doesn't just come up for hearing. So Supreme Court refused to deal with it. The High Court refuses to deal with some such case. So somewhere, you know, there's a complete, you know, free hand given to the police and the government to implement its policies. The checks and balances that the judiciary should have imposed does just not exist. I mean, I can also give you, you know, situations of Rajasthan where there is an anti-mining struggle and there is no Maoist movement. But even there, you know, the judiciary refuses to listen. If the police makes out a false case, and the police every day makes out cases against anti-mining activists, the entire Gurgaon cannot happen. If the Rajasthan Aravalis, actually the Rajasthan Aravalis are not going to exist beyond 20 years. The way they're being completely finished. You know, you go into a village, I mean, where Rohit comes from, Junjunu district, I mean, areas, mountains, they've just completely been leveled because you cannot have your Gurgaon and Noida and Jaipur and other places without the Aravali being taken away. And if the people say, but we want to continue with a pastoral economy, we want to continue with farming, they say, no, you don't have an option. You better do other things. You know, because you can't possibly farm if you have stone crushing happening. So then you know, the nexus of the politicians and the police, there's just no escape. So what I'm trying to say that this kind of, I mean, the police in any case is always tyrannical. The governments are always tyrannical, that's history. But you have the judiciary, which is supposed to put some sort of check. But the judiciary at no level is questioning. You know, I mean, they allow torture, they allow absolute, I mean, where prisoners ought to get bail, they just don't grant them bail. And so it goes on and on. So for every case would we come up to the Supreme Court. You know, like for instance, another PUCL activist from UP was arrested, Seema Azad, who's a writer. I think Laltu sitting here would have read her stuff. She's a writer, she's a poet. So she was called a den keeper of Maoists. Their words also are incredible. She's a den keeper of Maoists. Suddenly she's given that label. And what was, like Binayak Sen, what was the evidence against Binayak Sen? One of the evidence was a article written by Achin Binayak, challenging Manmohan Singh's policy that went in as a paper that showed him waging war against the Indian state. And then there was an article by Kalpana Kannabiran and Vasant Kannabiran on women in the Maoist movement. It was a critique of the Maoist movement, how women are treated so shabbily. That goes in as evidence that he's a Maoist. How did he get this paper? And a letter saying, "Dear comrade." Comrade to Maoist hai, wo hi bolte hain. So, I mean, this, so Seema Azad, what was Seema Azad? Seema Azad was regularly publishing in a magazine that she was bringing out. So her articles are simply the basis. You know, this is your UAPA, Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. This is your UAPA 1, 2, 3. So in a little history of these draconian laws, please remember, your draconian laws have never left this country. If TADA, more than 75,000 cases, people were booked under TADA, and these are mostly in the 80s, the entire, the whole crushing of the so-called Khalistani struggle, everybody goes under TADA. Then the post-Mandir movement, the Mumbai blasts. You know, everybody goes under TADA. You have a state like Gujarat, which had no terrorist act. But under TADA, they had more than 7,000 people. I mean, it's impossible to understand how, in the early 90s, Gujarat has 7,000 people, though they have nothing like terrorism, no act, but you just keep putting people in. So TADA was withdrawn, and out of the 75,000 people who went in, only 8,000 people were subjected to a trial. The rest for 8-10 years just remained, but they never went through a trial because the board only would not sit to confirm a TADA case. That is what TADA was. And then conviction was hardly any, you know. So, but people lost 10 years of their lives in this. Similarly, TADA was taken away and came POTA. And POTA was brought in by NDA government post 9/11, the whole regime of bringing in draconian laws. And under that, Jharkhand booked some 3,500 people, young boys, I mean, everybody got picked up for nothing, for no crime. Again, it did not even apply there. So when there was a whole campaign against POTA, post Gujarat genocide and the rest, you know, some blast cases. So the government of India, UPA 1, withdrew POTA, supposedly, but brought the whole of POTA as, I mean, the essential parts of POTA as the section of definition in UAPA. So the POTA never went, TADA never went, POTA never went, it just continues, you know. It has a way of reproducing itself. So while the government said we withdrew POTA, but they brought the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, and now this has undergone a lot of changes. Normally, if I'm caught for any crime under UAPA, that could be anything. It could be, firstly, you have something called banned organizations. So if you are sponsoring, supporting, or whatever, you know, a banned organization, there's a whole list of them. And then you're caught in the various sections. If you do get caught under these sections, under any ordinary law, in 90 days, if there is no charge sheet against you, you ought to be granted bail. But now the new UAPA, after 26/11, Mumbai, they extended it to 180 days. Now you simply have to go and tell the local court that, well, we want an extension of 90 days. So 180 days, which is 6 months, you can be kept without any charge sheet. Now, how fair is that? So this is the first expansion, the first amendment to UAPA, which is the existing law, that anybody going under UAPA 6 months, you will not get bail, statutory bail, because it's gone up to 180 days. Secondly, they used to ban organizations initially for 2 years. Now SIMI, please understand this, SIMI, the Student Islamic Movement of India, which was banned in 99 or something, in 2001. After 1999, SIMI has had no activity. There's nothing. So year after, every 2 years, the application used to come up to the special tribunal. There is a tribunal, and one of the Delhi High Court judges sits, she chair that tribunal, and they have to see the extension of whether that organization needs to continue with the ban. Now, there's Justice Geeta Mittal, who finally, 5 years ago, I think it was 2008, she said that there's just no evidence. All the evidence you're giving me is of 99. So I can, if the only way I can do justice is to dismiss the case of the prosecution. There's no way that the ban can be extended for SIMI, because there's just no activity, there's just no act. And she did sittings all over, and every evidence that they brought fell through. So she dismissed that case. You won't believe it. She dismissed it on Friday afternoon. It's a High Court level bench. On Saturday itself, they went up to the Supreme, they managed to get the judgment out. They went up to the Supreme Court. I mean, they went without a judgment only. They went up to the Supreme Court in the house of one of the judges and got a stay on that, on the SIMI judgment of, not being banned, on, revocation of ban. And after that, they did an amendment of the UAPA. It's now 5 years. Because it's a con evidence collect karega. You know it, that there are so many organizations that you've banned, you can't. I mean, they also know that what they're saying is rubbish. So a lot of organizations don't need to be banned. You may have, you may have some organizations who you think need to be banned. However, we as a human rights organization don't agree with banning of any organization, because if you ban, you just subvert the whole process. And when you subvert the whole process of people's expressions, then you are going to have problems, and that'll create more problems. So let at least say the Maoists, for instance, let their front organizations exist. Why should their front organizations, like the women's, or why should they be banned? Their poets organization, their women's organization, why should that be banned? You may want to, I mean, not that we agree, but you may want to, but why the front organizations? And there is a Supreme Court judgment that mere membership of a banned organization doesn't mean that you need to be convicted for a crime that you may have not committed, But mere membership is not a crime. In spite of that, on this side we see that the people get picked up. So now they've extended it to 5 years. And now the new, of course, there are more than 100 draconian laws. I can't go through all of them, but these are tools. I mean, every state has its Gunda Act. Every state, and those are horrible, and organized crime acts, Makoka and Guchkoka and Karnataka. Did it finally get the permission? But there is a law, not got the permission. And you have these Unlawful Activities Act and everything. These are all draconian laws. But the long and short of it is the most recent law that has been brought in, the whole FCRA. Now, as I'm talking to you, there's one organization called INSAF. INSAF was constituted after the demolition of the Babri Masjid. So after the demolition of the Babri Masjid, a lot of people came together and they formed this forum called INSAF. Now, INSAF has been supporting all struggles. For instance, in Jharkhand, their president, Dayamani Barla, tribal woman, was arrested. Why? Because Nagari is one village, and the entire village was being taken to set a national law school and IIM. So they said, why are you taking this land of ours? We will give you, people said, we will give you alternative land. Don't take this land of ours. But now the Chief Justice of the High Court is the Chancellor of the National Law University. So they got no hearing. in any court. So Dayamani Barla was arrested. They picked her up initially on an obstruction case of an MNREGA struggle. She had done a struggle for wages. They picked her up under that pretext that she had obstructed the work of government people, prevented payments or something. They picked her up that, and then they kept putting cases against her. So then came the Nagari case of Indian, National Law Institute, National Law University, and then came the IIM case. Of course, so Insaf was openly, because she was their president, it had to openly support her, and Insaf has supported this whole Kudam Kulam protest. Insaf has supported a lot of protests that are happening all over. And the recent ADB meeting that is happening in Greater Noida, they went to protest outside it, that we don't want your money, India doesn't want your money, we know what your money, we know the conditionality of your money, we don't want it. And there was this, whatever, so many $1,000 or $1,00,000 that got that they wanted to give, but we don't want it because it's a burden on individuals. So it's a small group protesting. And they were protesting on the 2nd or 3rd of May. They got a notice on the 4th that now your FCRA has been suspended. Any money that you have and you need to take out, the deputy secretary so-and-so will have to sign and you can get your money out. The new FCRA law, I mean, this is Insaf, and one organization, or like the various church organizations, was suddenly declared, in Kudam Kulam. All the church organizations got, they were sort of taken in that they were doing some illegal work, they were doing missionary work, when the only space, if you go to a seaside village, the largest space was the church. People had no other place to go. If you go there, you're in the sea, and before the sea, you're in the church, and there's no other space where people could sit. So the church became the demon, and of course they stripped 4 major organizations of the FCRA under the new FCRA law, which would even affect, I don't know about Azim Premji, but it can affect a lot of universities, is that if by any chance you are seen earlier it was like very subverted that you could not support any kind of protest, but now it's really overt that if your organization is seen to be part of any protest, you lose your citizenship rights. The moment you get an FCRA, you lose your citizenship rights because you can't now, as a citizen, protest. So I want to end here by saying that I don't think universities and academics must shut their ears to the kind of cry of the Indian people at this moment. Some of us, a lot of us are going to, as people say, we're already in the queue, We know it. And I'm not being an alarmist, I'm not trying to raise panic, but we know it. We know the way, I have so many false cases on me, so which, at any point of time the government wants, they can open up, because I can't be fighting each case. 6, 7 in various courts, I can't be. Contempt notices by courts, how much? How many cases? I'm unable to cope with all these cases. So, I could go on and on with case studies, but I think I'll stop here. And I think, a university that is emerging, whatever be your financing, it is corporate financing. You cannot get over your history. But whatever it be, a university is a university once you come within that framework. It should, I really think, if universities now don't have free speech as its subtext, if they don't have chairs which are supposed to look at how the Indian people can at least exercise their constitutional rights of Article 19 and Article 21. I don't think this university, of course, your approaches. I could give you a lot of case studies where educational workers have gone into jail just looking at toilets. They have been declared Maoists and they've gone into jail. I could just go on and on. But somewhere where a university takes a position that, of course, you should go beyond constitutional frameworks. Why should you be limited by a constitutional framework? A university is supposed to be a place where the vision ought to be the sky should be the limit. But there should be something on free speech, which is really, really essential, connecting to economic, social, and cultural rights, because that has become the subtext of the whole struggle. So something around that, if you could begin and, I mean, help us. I mean, if somebody, wherever I go, people tell me, can you tell us how many people are in jail? I said, I can't. I can't tell you how many people are in jail. You know, I mean, just students going into this, doing this kind of research. I'll stop here. I've spoken for about 55 minutes. Thank you. Yeah, if there are any
Regarding the Kundakulam nuclear power plant, the question again come of the it's like if we go with the nuclear, that for the energy need of the country, and if we that's also a challenge for the residents of that area. So there will be always some contradiction, that which would be a best manner. So I gone through with some details of the nuclear energy and found that this is the sustainable kind of energy. By that we can fulfill our needs. And about the safety measures, that government of India is saying that it is adopting all the safety measures, but there will always be some kind of risk.
lacuna.
Yes, risk, because we can't just stop tsunami and all these things. So what do you think about this?
Can we take a few more questions to make it?
First of all, I'm really glad to see you here again. And it's just little clarification. When you said about tribal losing their legal rights when they are caught, and when people like from marginalized society, they are caught and under the laws like POTA, TADA, and etc. So what is the root cause of all these? Is it the failure of the whole judiciary or the judicial system of India? Or, I mean, when we, as a student, when we study, so where do we link all these dots?
I was just wondering, because you laid forward all these problems with dissent and speech and putting forward one's views, but what are the kinds of institutional responses? Like, how does one approach this now? Because it seemed like a story of a lot of gloom, like the fact that you know, saying anything can be criminalized, right? That's the story that we're getting. But how do we? What is that we have to strengthen, and what is the way forward?
See the linkage between the human rights movement and the other people's movements themselves, and how do you think there's a potential for making the human rights movement more of a mass movement? Because I think you said there's very few people working on this issue in different parts of the country. How, I guess, do you get more people involved? What is the basis, in your thoughts, of inspiring more people to be a part of this group?
Okay, but I don't think you can have the whole uranium thing as a kind of sustainable energy option. It's not. And I'm not a person of nuclear studies or energy studies, but something like uranium ought to remain in the ground only. You know, it ought not to come out and come along. Your energy options are so many. Why are you not trying all the other alternatives like wind, sunshine? I mean, you have so much of it. Why the nuclear energy option? I mean, we haven't grown beyond 2% in our nuclear energy with so many, with about, I think Kudamkulam will be the 12th nuclear power plant. We have 11 nuclear power plants running. Still, we've never crossed 2% of our entire energy consumption, you know, from the nuclear energy, never crossed 2%. So I think that, I mean, of course, whatever nuclear engineers may say, we are not willing to buy after the terrible accidents that have happened. And I just want to give you one very small story connected with the Supreme Court judgment. Supreme Court judgment came out 3 days ago from the Supreme Court. There was another judgment that came out. There was somebody in Kakrapar. Kakrapar is near Vedchi, Baroda. There is a nuclear power plant now. In the early 90s, water got into the nuclear reactors and it would have caused mayhem. So this man blew the whistle, I'm forgetting his name. This man blew the whistle and informed everybody to run away and informed the neighborhood that abhi bahut bhayanak kuch hone wala, aap log sab chhod do, chale jao. So this man was kicked out of his job. I mean, he saved the whole place. He was kicked out of his job. He thought he had actually done nothing wrong. So he fought for his service back in the plant. He went to the lower court, he went to the high court, then he went to the Supreme Court. And 15 years, whatever, how many ever years, 20 years he has been fighting. Finally in the Supreme Court, the judgment where he has prevented nuclear fallout from happening, he's told in the Supreme Court judgment, and that is why, you know, the whole betrayal of the judiciary towards the people of this country. He's told that how can he's 12th pass, how can a 12th pass person have known that a disaster was about to happen with the filling up of water? A whistleblower for a nuclear power plant cannot be a 12th standard person. So the Supreme Court doesn't accept his argument. Yes, उसने गलत किया, and so he cannot get back his service. I'm simply trying to say that nuclear power plants, if you live in the neighborhood of a nuclear power plant, there are constant fallouts happening, constant, you know, chota, mota, bada, something or the other happening. If there was a regime which was transparent completely, you know, that we will allow, like in a prison. Like in a prison, we have fought and fought because these are closed, opaque, custodial spaces. We've been, I mean, there was a system of a visitors group, you know, under the prison law that, you know, a visitors committee gets constituted of following eminent people who go regularly. And the only transparency they will allow is of a visitors committee. You know, they don't, but it is at least of independent people. In some jail manuals, they've agreed. In most jail manuals also, they've not agreed. Similarly in this, if a lot was right, they would have allowed. In Kakrapar, you have these famous nuclear scientists, Sangamitra Gadekar and Surendra Gadekar. Sangamitra Gadekar, she's a doctor. She was part of the Chernobyl, after the Chernobyl fallout, the international committee that was set up to examine Chernobyl. She was in that committee. She can never get access to Kakrapar. She and her husband, Sangamitra, Surendra Gadekar, just keeping out any forms of transparency measures, putting out, you know, regularly. Even ordinary polluting plants have to put out how much of pollution will they throw out regularly under rules, you know, under pollution control rules. How much smoke of some pollutant they're going to smoke out, their chimneys are going to smoke out, or that, you know, the kinds of pollutants that they're going to put out, they're supposed to regularly put out. The nuclear energy program of this country is not even accountable to the Parliament of India. It's not, you don't even have to make it accountable to the Parliament. It's above the Parliament of India. It's straight away underneath the Prime Minister and the Energy Minister. How can, I would argue that all our plants are unsafe till the transparency measures are not made public, till independent nuclear scientists don't get into it, till international organizations don't come and examine it. So I would go with Kudam people that we feel highly unsafe. And I think India should try other energy options. Why is it not investing so much money? It is investing in these rotted out nuclear reactors, you know, when countries have given up on nuclear power and nuclear energy as one of the energy options, and countries have given up, they shut down their reactors. We are buying those because we will now set up 17 more reactors.
afford this wind energy and solar
Can
energy.
I just stop you here? Please look at the budget papers presented by the last finance minister, Mr. Chidambaram. What is the tax foregone to corporates? Tax foregone. It's 5,60,000 crores is the tax foregone for corporates. We don't have 2 lakh crore rupees for a food law. We will not have so many lakh crore rupees for toilets, for education. But, you know, it's not that we don't have the money. We also know where we should do away with and not do away with. Please remember there is a whole politics behind, in global finance politics, behind bringing in nuclear energy as an option in India, when we could have experimented with other. I would say that you read a lot of what Gopal Krishnan has written, who was chairman of the AARB, and of course, don't make up your mind till you've not read everything. And even if you, at the end of the day, feel nuclear energy is an option, we won't have a fight with you over it. We can continue holding different opinions. But surely you would agree that safety measures ought to be absolutely transparent. People of that area ought to know that what is happening to them, you know, with something which is so lethal like nuclear radiation. Surely people have a right to know. Regarding Priyanka, your thing on tribals, what? Like they're picked up and put in jails?
Renewable rights activists are fighting against it. So where do we draw the line? Should we just say that, you know, our judicial system is inefficient to deal with all these problems?
See, somewhere, of course, it has to be looked at in totality. Judiciary is only one. Of course, the judicial failure, again and again, in protection of human rights, at all levels, we are observing, because judiciary is part of the same Indian state apparatus which wants to pursue. Why are these people being put in? Yeah, I'm not saying that the Indian state doesn't have to deal with an armed struggle. It does have to deal with a group which says that they want to make war with the Indian state. There are 17 groups in Manipur who are saying we want to make war with the Indian state. There is the CPI Maoist party which is saying we want to make war. It's not that the Indian state doesn't have a lot on its plate, you know, but the manner in which it is going about, there is no, as if the military solution is the only solution to all this. And in this military solution that it is finding up, for instance, in Manipur, on an average, encounter deaths are 300 a year. You know, now what do you, the whole population is like not even 2 million people in the whole state, and you have 300 million year after year, and that's what the PIL in the Supreme Court is dealing with, you know, and the apparatus just gets away every time with this. So, so basically, why is this Indian state waging a war against so many people? The Indian state is making war against its own people because there is an agenda that it wants to pursue. It's not, at any point of time, any government will have lots of dissenting groups and it has to deal with them, you know. And it has to think of solutions within a democratic framework. It cannot think of solutions by violating en masse, you know. So it cannot declare all tribals. In fact, Professor Amit Bhaduri, when he went on a fact-finding to this place, Chhattisgarh in Dantewar, so there was an SP, Rahul Sharma, who's now killed himself. He committed suicide. He touched the feet of Professor Bhaduri and said, "Oh, you don't know, but I was one of your students, is that." So Professor Bhaduri thought that, well, if he's declared himself as a student of mine, let me take a bit of liberty. So he said, we want to go on the other side. He said, well, once you cross the river, if there is a bullet fired at you, don't blame us. You know, our people will kill you. You know, because everybody on the other side of the Indravati is a Maoist for them. So you can't, you know, you can't behave in this fashion. They've set up 22 jungle warfare schools. where the Indian military, actually the Indian military has entered for training and all that. So the scale of violation is only going to increase. We don't see this scale of violation coming down, whatever be the nature of government. Even if the UPA 2 goes and any other, I mean UPA 2 will go, but any other dispensation, whether it's NDA, we're not even sure whether third front type government will have any other point of view. We're not sure whether they're going to have any other point of view. This is only going to continue. So actually there is going to be, for some time just now, there's going to be no solution because there's just so many corporates that have to come in and take over those minerals, and I mean, because all that has already been signed. So, so we don't see the end of this. So your question, how does one approach it, and can the human rights movement be a mass movement? See, I mean, I think regarding how does one approach it, see, it's very difficult because the entire media is also against you, you know, I mean, in the sense, the media, particularly the electronic media, which is actually setting every day, even the debate for the print media. Earlier we thought that the print media had an edge, and it was the print media which would lead the electronic media, but it's the other way around. And we have seen it that these one-liners, what in Rajasthan we call the bite brigade, the electronic media likes to put everything out in one line. So in one line, even if you give, Professor Amartya Sen in front of us gave a 25-minute lecture on how the parliament ought to debate and discuss, how his whole thesis of the argumentative Indian, how argument had to be strengthened in parliament, whether it be corruption, Sarabjit or the food. Finally, all the next day we were so shocked to see even senior journalists writing that Professor Amartya Sen said that the food bill ought to be passed without any amendments. So the complete distortion that we are seeing in the media, and of course its own something like Times Now, you know, Maoist terrorists, you know, and all that. Of course, I mean, I'm not saying that violations are not happening. Non-state actor violations are very serious. One is not denying it, you know. Killing is just no solution. To counter state violence and counter violence are not the solution. We clearly stand by it. However, with the media, we having lost out on the media which has this jingoism, asserting that same point of view. I mean, in that din, where do we start? You know, I mean, it's quite bleak. I mean, what is the space? What is the space that we have within all this? I still feel all is not lost. And I do feel that whenever we go and talk about it with people, people do listen. I mean, it's just that even in the worst part of Chhattisgarh, where when Binayak got arrested, not one single person was coming out, even from the PUCL. So many people just withdrew, you know, after Binayak's arrest, because they were told, abhi to Binayak ko kiya, ab Rashmi is going to go in and Gautam is going to go in. I mean, they gave a list, the particular DG. So that is how I had to go all the time, because they had nothing against me. So with that kind of a scenario in Chhattisgarh, we just learned that on 8th of March, which was declared as a day where we lend our voice for the support of the release of Soni Sori, there was a flash dance done by some group of students who just came together in Raipur. They danced and sang and demanded the release of Soni Sori. So it's not that where we thought that in Chhattisgarh there would be no support for Soni Sori. I mean, I'm talking about Soni Sori, presuming that all of you know. This is the woman they came looking for in my house. They came looking for Soni Sori in my house. And after her arrest, she was sexually tortured by the SP, and that SP ended up getting the President's Medal. Also, that's also something that we are fighting. And Soni Sori, the humiliation that she was subjected to in every jail, of course, they found stones in her vagina. And apart from that, when she was struggling and her matter came up to the Supreme Court, we took it up straight to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court also got her medically examined where the stones came out. She was stripped regularly. I mean, that is the thing, you know, she's regularly stripped and humiliated in the women's jail. But since she refuses to give up on this, now they've told her we'll declare you pagal. Because the National Commission of Women gave a straight statement that she's mentally disturbed and she needs a lot of counseling. So they said she's mentally ill. You know, the interpretation by the Chhattisgarh government was that she's mentally ill. So now she's tortured by being told that she's, she needs to go to Agra. So even for Soni Sori, where there is a nationwide and a global campaign for her release, in Chhattisgarh, where there seemed to be no space other than PUCL and a few other human rights activists, the women's movement has more or less been silenced in Chhattisgarh. It's really been silenced because Rashmi, who used to be leading it, was really, when she brought a primitive tribe to demand rations outside the chief minister's house, she was told by the पुलिस तुम तो नक्सलियों को लेके आई हो आपके अपने धरने में और अब तुम भी जाओगी. So somewhere she lost her husband and everything, so she's also taken a bit of a back seat. So this is really, really nothing much, but even within that space. So I really think that wherever we see a small space, and that is why coming to universities and colleges, because I think there is a disconnect. You don't read any of this. You don't see any of this on television. You don't read any of this. It is there in the social media. There is a lot of it, but I don't know how many of you are connected with it. So I think that if we can expand this space, it's not lost. I think we can stretch it. We can expand it by we may not get recruits into PUCL. We're not even recruiting. We're not recruiting into our organization's people, but at least really it's like what Pastor Nimula said, that, first they came for the Jews. First they came for the communists, and I was silent because I was not a communist. Then they came for the Jews. Whatever it goes on, socialists, then Jews. And now, when they've come for me, there's nobody. So I think people are understanding that they need to connect. And how can you give away your democratic space so easily? How can you just hand it over? Whatever you are, you are because of a certain politics. Because of a certain politics, you're getting certain jobs. And others are not getting jobs. It's because of certain politics. You're getting your water because of a certain politics. You exist in the middle classes because of a certain politics that believes in a certain kind of development, marginalizing all the others. It's that politics which is making you. So there's another politics that people want to save their livelihoods, want to have certain different economies. That's another politics. You need to show, you need to tell the people that you realize it's a certain politics that because of which you're getting it. So you know what, you analyze where you are located. And I think one is to keep engaging with courts. We are not giving up on courts, but we are frightened every time we go that we may get a negative order. But you have to keep trying lower courts. You have to keep experimenting at lower court, at high court level before coming. You cannot give up on the courts. You cannot give up on dialoguing with youngsters who are totally of that model, who are perpetuating that very model of corporate loot which we are questioning, which is actually destroying the whole governance and making more insecure people's human rights, that whole. They are part of that framework, but that doesn't mean that they are all culpable, in that whole design. They are not. So we need to continue dialoguing. We need to, whatever little space you get, one is existing spaces. And the other thing is, I really think that something like movement, all movements have shrunk, frankly speaking. And I don't see, look at Kejriwal 1 and 2, Anna Hazare 1. Movements are shrinking. There are, people come together in issues. People will come together in issues and then go away. There isn't any more now a framework, where people are going to stay on with you for long. People will come together on issues. This is the new politics that is emerging. The new movements are around issues. They're not around, political ideology. So the left also has to rethink. The left has to be the purists. They end up being so purist. I'm saying the left groupings. I don't mean the left parties. That, we cannot go with an Arvind Kejriwal. We cannot go with so-and-so. We may not go. We may disagree. But it is, you have to remember that the new politics that is happening is around issues. I mean, that is what we are seeing in front of us. Even a pink chaddi campaign in a social media, very elite framework was a reply to Muthallik. Can we say it was not a successful campaign to Muthallik, this Ram Sene, wherever he was located in Mangalore or wherever, the pink chaddi campaign. So I really think that I mean, on the one hand, we don't have a framework. We really do. We don't have a framework. And somewhere the grand theory, we seem to have given up on it. But and how will we envision it? How will we go back? I don't know how. But at least as of now, the space is really to get into issue-based movements, because that is where people are coming. We are not going to get a sustained platform. PUCL is not going to expand its membership. NAPM is not going to have an expansion on its membership. Kudam Kulam came together on an issue, but to say that they are not patriarchal, they are not castes, they are not, I mean, all that is not going to happen, no? So they will fritter away, I mean, by and by they'll come together again. Just now we don't know, we must go and understand what's happening to those people, POSCO, you know. So people are coming together around issues. And that is the new politics. Somewhere we have to connect there. Human rights groups have to connect there, keep their objectivity, keep their fairness, and connect there. I don't see any kind of new political ideology. And I don't see that. And again, I mean, this requires more questioning. We have a lecture in it, if you want. We called Nivedita Menon the 31st JP Memorial Lecture of the PUCL on the 23rd of March, 1977. Indira Gandhi signed the emergency off. She lost on the 16th, and by the time she signed, it was on the 23rd of March. So that day we hold it as a JP Memorial Lecture. So 31st lecture, we actually called Nivedita Menon to address this question. Where do we go? You know, what are the spaces? What are the existing politics? I mean, of course, she was also exploring. It's an interesting paper. What did she call it? Naya Andolan, Naya Nazariye. New movements, new perspectives. So can you write off? I don't think so we can write off these movements. I'm not saying you get carried away, but somewhere you need to start connecting. Like, for instance, what happened after December 16th. The women's movement the women's movement is so small, and the section of the feminist movement, women's movement is even more micro. But when thousands and thousands came out on the streets, you know, could you say that because you know, they were not part of feminist politics, or, I mean, of course, they may be doing a lot of wife beating at home, they may be doing a lot of domestic violence at home. They will not take on custodial violence issues, they will not maybe take on marital rape issues, which constitute more than 75% of the total rape, which never gets registered. But because they don't agree with you there, you won't go with them. They were the larger constituents. They were the constituents. You would go with them. And I mean, they got on to the way they broke Lutyens' Delhi barricade and went up to the president's house. I mean, never has that happened before in Delhi. So when there was such an outrage and people came out, of course, the death penalty was something which was very frightening, very, very frightening in the whole discourse. But what do you do? I mean, how do you engage now with that? You've gone with them. They are putting pressure. They are the ones who are putting pressure on the government to do something on sexual violence. But then they want it quickly, so the government starts giving you these SOPs, and then it says death. So what do? I mean, you have to know how to, it's our failure that we are unable to come out with more creative ways of connecting and dialoguing with absolute, you know, with things that are violative. It's our failure, you know. It's not there. Why can't we guide them on something like the death penalty? I mean, we've been going on and on talking about it. Death penalty is not the solution in rape, you know. And death penalty was, or whatever, you know. So this is something, in terms of directions, I have no answer. But I would say this. I think, was there a hand out there?
I was actually wondering, in your experience, if there's been a state administration which has had, sorry, could you not hear me? Okay, I was actually wondering, in your experience, if there's been a state administration which has had a decent track record of protecting or expanding human rights, and whether there is something like this that we can learn from.
Of course, of course. I mean, see, no. Listen, one is not writing off, but one is not writing off. I mean, we are not saying do away, but there is no backbone left. So, for instance, the present Chief Secretary of Chhattisgarh is an excellent person. But it was his advice to me. Don't go. You know, it's not something that should come on record. It ought to be deleted from Chandan later when you go through it. There's no spine left. And one of them, who has been the chief architect of the Chhattisgarh food security issues, this guy, I went up to him also because I was in a state of panic, you know, after this raid. I mean, it is an attack. I didn't know what to do. I mean, I never tell. I mean, I should have known. So I met somebody else. I mean, I just happened to meet him. And he told me, he said, the state will spare nobody. And there'll be lots of crimes of omissions. So I said, but you would know better. He said, no, he says, no way can we question all this. And even in, I mean, at the level of the police, what gets percolated at the level of the police, what gets percolated at the level of governments, if you give them these laws, you know, they will only use it against you. I mean, why do these laws exist? Firstly, if you give them where your intent can be criminalized, like Chhattisgarh Special Public Security Act, where you can criminalize intent, can you concretize intent? Can the intent be, I mean, two lawyers are sitting here, big time lawyers, can you tell us how they concretize intent and show it as a crime having been committed? So when you have such laws where intent can be criminalized, where are you left with? When you can ban an organization for 5 years, you know, and so many other things of the way they... So one thing is laws. The other thing is even under simple IPC, you have all these penal provisions of sedition and all, which can be invoked anytime. So the state is armed very well. It has armed itself very well. And it has a public opinion in its favor. See, for instance, when the public opinion went against it, after Nirbhaya, how they were, you know, every day they were changing their statements, you know, morning, evening. I mean, Shinde wanting to come out. Sheila Dikshit came and sat in Jantar Mantar and they came to beat her. See, when public opinion goes against them, then they're willing to change. So some way, you can only make them accountable by building public opinion against them. And you've got to do it with your tools, whatever are available, to use whatever little section of the media, despite being every media is corporate. I mean, there is nothing like very small section which may be non-corporate. I mean, in fact, Reliance, you all should know that Reliance actually owns 3/4 of the media. It has money with all the major channels. So how can you expect any other voice? So whatever within that framework of the electronic media, not the print media, whatever little space. So good administration, they're good people. If they could take a stand. Actually, just before I come to you, Mr. Kannabiran, who passed away, he used to be PUCL president for years, a great lawyer, great visionary. In fact, you should show his film. Why don't you come and show his film, The Advocate? Please see it. It's for 2 hours, I think. You must see his film. So he taught us something in human rights. He said, learn every time to insurrect the law. How can you use it in favor of the people? Because every law, other than RTI, I don't know. Is there a law? If the grievance redressal came, it would be against the state. If it came, if the Lokpal came, it would be against the state. If an independent CBI came, it would be against the state. But just now, we only have one law, where the people are in control. It's the right to information. Is there any other law? So he taught us. I mean, this is the law that came to us. but he taught us how to use the law, the law that strengthened the state, how to use it in favor of the people. So that strategic way of using which you can try. Those are some of the ways that you can. I mean, I'm not writing of administration, but please remember, please go to Mussoorie. I think one internship should be in Mussoorie. And you just ask the rate of dowry of the IAS and IPS officers. Please ask the rate of dowry. You know, I mean, how can you expect them to be decent? I'm not saying there wouldn't be a section which is not taking dowry, but there are proper rates. If you come from Bihar, if you come from Gujarat, if you come from Tamil, I mean, there are dowry rates written. You ask the teachers. Like when Harsh Mandar was a teacher, he used to always call us for one session on dowry, there's dowry rates, come and do a dialogue with them. So it's too deep, It's with so much, with corruption beginning there, can you expect decent governance? Can you expect these? And then you have a revolving door policy with administration. For instance, sorry I'm digressing, but there is something called children's meals in the Anganwadis. Now, which company, which platform controls? There's the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which have formed a global alliance called GAIN, Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition. Now, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation put so much money, and they are looking at 25,000 crores, more money going into the Anganwadis, if with the kind of ICDS that we are planning. So we have talked of, and the Supreme Court has ordered, local production of meals. And this entire lobby is trying its best to enter to give packaged food or to be the suppliers of children's meals. And there was a secretary, like Renuka, I mean, in the Supreme Court, it was shocking to see Renuka, I mean, the whole case from the government side is fought by the Attorney General. It's Soli Sorabji or Ashok Desai. But Renuka Chaudhary would have her own lawyer. And her secretary, Meena Swaminathan, wrote a book on how good it was to have packaged food. Now, how do you deal with this? And here the Supreme Court is ordering, remove contractors from meals. And here, when the principal secretary, Women and Child, is doing this. And then what they did, still the Supreme Court was very firm. So what they did, in 2009, they got a schedule that food and there is FDA, Food and Adulteration Standards Authority. They have some norms. If those norms are not met, the children cannot be given food. Now, SHGs are going to, take microbalance and measure iodine and measure micronutrients to give food. I mean, the food that we eat at home is nutritious. If SHG groups are providing food, it would be nutritious food. I mean, you tell them, give them a basic training. And that lobby is even working today. And surely Meena Swaminathan went abroad. You go to World Bank, you go to that place, and you come back and there's so much of conflict of interest within the government today. So much of conflict of interest, I'm sorry. It is only going to get more and more unclean. It's not going to get cleaner. We do have some excellent people, but are increasingly spineless. Somebody like Harsh Mandar could resign on some of these questions. There must be others also. But it's increasingly because the monies that are being dangled, poor young IAS officers and IPS officers and others get tempted. They get tempted and succumb. Yeah.
After that, all of them said that they will hold a march from Gaya to the place they were killed, where they built the canal. To that place. And they will get back. Nothing happened after that. The SP said they were killed in a daylight robbery. They were, the case there. That is one part where how the civil society approached the whole case.
You mean basically betrayed them by not pursuing the case?
By not pursuing, I feel that. That's one way we actually learn. There's another, case that happened I don't say it's a case, it's a student uprising that happened. In Chicago sometimes, I don't remember when it was, but the toilets in the Chicago University were not working. They went to a professor, they said, what has to be done? The toilets are not working. So he said, get the toilets uprooted, take it to the Chicago airport, which is the busiest airport in the world, keep it in front of it. In half an hour, the vice chancellor of the university comes to the gate of the Chicago airport, gets them all cleared, and the toilets are clean, the toilets are well built and well maintained after that. No, these are I'm not saying these are exact contrasts, but what I'm saying is that we somewhere are the civil society in India and are we really finding out alternatives? Are we stuck with? I'm not saying stuck, but somewhere we're not getting much creative. One of this attempt of yours, I believe, is a very creative one. I thank you for coming to it. Why I'm saying so is because I recently met 66 students in Kumaran School. That's a allied school in Bangalore. We played a game with them where they have to put X and Y. X, if you say, it's a game which puts true and false. It's X and Y. Out of the 48 combinations, 44 combinations were X. That's they opted for false. 66 students, 66 highly individualistic, highly, these might be CEOs, they might become, I don't know what in future. And we have a student force that is like this. So this is one creative attempt that we are making. I'm asking the students over here. That's what. Can we be more creative? Can we be more forthcoming? And can the civil society offer it?
See, I must say, I should structure my talk differently. I think we've also been successful in our struggles. I'm not saying that we've only been betrayed. I don't think that we've only let down. I think Sarita and Mahesh, you see, the case of Sarita and Mahesh, it's really sad that it got caught within local Bihar politics of activists. And Sarita's husband Pushpendra left for Tata Institute. He became director of that rural campus. And now he's gone to Surat. He is now at Center for Social Studies in Surat. Every struggle has to have an anchor. And first thing that you've got to see in place, who is the anchor? Are they family members? Are they other activists? Who is the anchor? You've got to get in place an anchor. Outsiders like us can only connect with struggles when there is a group already in place. Like for instance, Dr. Minax and there was Irina Sen, there were some PUCL members of Chhattisgarh. Then people like us would get active. I know it because we tried to do something for Sarita and Mahesh, but there's so much of infighting, difference, and then Pushpendra leaving. So that has been a tragedy. But if we do on a case-by-case basis, I think there have been many letdowns. We've been successful also. For instance, this in the afternoon, we were talking of the cow slaughter bill of Karnataka. Like wherever the BJP goes, it has, a checklist. Ye karna hai, ye karna hai, ye karna hai. Whether it's in Rajasthan or whether it's in Karnataka, they're bringing a cow slaughter bill, like freedom of religion bill, which means basically throttle the missionaries. So they'll bring in a freedom of religion, they have their checklist. For every community, for everything on their agenda, they have a law or a program. So the whole cow slaughter bill, so PUCL Karnataka was very active. And somewhere though the cow slaughter bill came, it prevented it. It was openly violated, it was openly challenged on the streets of Karnataka and different cities. Like I was telling them, Punendu sitting here, he's the expert. Muslims, because now they are the ones who are left with the largest numbers. A lot of other communities have come away, and of course you do have individuals. There may be that worship, that whole ideology, but people also don't do it for various reasons, you know. They understand that whole ecosystem and the place of the cow. They don't do it for various reasons. So a cow slaughter bill is basically to capture a Muslim. Because wherever, you know, people breed cows and they want to sell, you know, to places, and it goes to Bihar and other places. Because Rajasthan does have a very huge, you know, numbers of cattle are huge, the population is huge. So it is a supplier of cows and other things. So you have the bill just to harass the Muslims. Every case that we've investigated. But here, because culturally it didn't fit in, you could challenge it by openly eating beef all over of, you know, whatever nature, you could do it. So I was asking them, you know, I said, did it have an impact, you know, that you do a rally, at the end of the rally, you serve food, you serve beef and everybody eats, and it's a major statement, and it was being done on the roads. So I was asking him that, you know, so I said, how, I mean, as somebody who's coming from Rajasthan, where, you know, it's so different, the culture, how was it accepted? So you said that was the way it was challenged, you know. So, I mean, we've had lots and lots of successes also. We've had the whole Adarsh scam came out of the NAPM work. Lavasa came out of NAPM work. You know, I mean, as a small group, the National Alliance of People's Movement work, you can take it up to a point, but you see, it's a very long and drawn out battle. It's a very long and drawn out battle because the way the engagement with police, the engagement with courts, for instance, an anti-mining activist, I was telling some friends who came last year and visited that area, an anti-mining activist was killed in Rajasthan 2 months ago. And for the last 55 days, there's a dharna happening round the clock in that village. They managed to stop the mining, but they're unable to get those who killed him. You know, I mean, after all, he was just having his dinner. He'd had 2 bites of his food, and then somebody called him, and finally they found him in a pond where you can't drown. But the whole thing is so manipulated, the medical report. And please remember this young girl who asked about administration, the doctors always destroy. You know, when women are burned to death or whatever, doctors play the worst role in medical reports, you know, whether it's rape exam or any other, you know, rape examination or any other. So here, nobody can drown. I mean, unless if somebody holds you, like you can drown in a bucket, you can die if somebody pushes you, holds your face down into a bucket of water, otherwise you can't possibly drown. So this is not even 1 foot high water, it's just a collection of dirty water, and they say he died due to drowning. I mean, how could this person die? So people are sitting, struggling. I mean, I'm very worried whether we will be able to get that whole struggle, anything. We are demanding that the CBI investigate. The government of Rajasthan is not going to give us CBI. We're going to go to the High Court. And this dharna is happening continuously. Every day women are sitting, you know, for women in Rajasthan who are behind the parda, you know, Brahmin, Jat women coming and sitting, saying, nahi, CBI ko jaanch do, aparadhiyon ko pakdo. We'll go to the High Court, please transfer it to CBI. We will lose in the High Court after some time. We know High Court won't do it. We know the track record of this High Court. We'll go to the Supreme Court. We don't know. So, I mean, we are trying our best. At the end, somewhere, we may have tried, but Pradeep Sharma's killers may just get away. So it's very difficult. I mean, we're living in very difficult times. My own case, you know, where there was an attack on me, I wrote to the NHRC. NHRC, you should read the judgment of the NHRC. And especially when I gave so much material that it was complete, you know, I was targeted. They came to actually arrest me, to take me away, or just to threaten me. Even after that, the NHRC has endorsed the whole raid, saying that they got an order of the magistrate. That they got an order from the magistrate, so we cannot question it. So then I was left to go to courts, and then everybody said, yeah, just leave it. So I've also given up. I've given up on my own. I mean, of course, everybody was with me, so I just felt that At least my friends believed me and they came in solidarity all over. India people came in solidarity against the government of Rajasthan, government of Chhattisgarh. This is my justice. Bhavri Devi, she was here in Bangalore. She spoke at ALF. For 20 years, it's the, in 1992, 15th of November, she was gang raped 1992, September 22nd. The acquittal of all the rapists happened 95, 15 November. Her case went into appeal in the High Court on 18 January of 1996, January. We're in the 17th year of the appeal and it hasn't come up. 17th year of our appeal and 20 years since the case was running, and we've not had a hearing of the appeal. Now Bhavri is getting older. She is malnourished, anemic, At 35 she was grey. When she was gang raped, she was grey, and they all said, how can a woman who's grey ever be raped? How can, gang rape? Unheard of. Everybody sitting here. Everybody who know that whole discourse. Will we ever get Bhavri justice? But Bhavri knows this कि जनता की अदालत में मुझे न्याय मिला है. मुझे आज भी लोग कहते हैं कि भवरी तुम सच्ची हो. Because to live with this कि भवरी तुम झूठी हो, and not just झूठी, भवरी रंडी तुम झूठी हो. This is Bhavri. Will we ever get Bhavri justice within the mainstream? She is waiting. Even Abhi, recently we were in JNU, they'd invited her. She says, I want this system has to give me justice. And if it is not the system, I want Bhateri Gaon, which betrayed me, her village. जो रेपिस्टों के साथ चला गया, मेरे को साथ, I want justice. So what do you do with that fire? We will keep trying the courts, no? What can we do with the courts? So I don't know. I think we will have to also look at our successes very differently and keep trying, keep connecting and not give up. And we are not giving up by any chance. We are not going to give up, and we are very, very small. We are not even a drop in the ocean. Our work is so micro. Our work is so much on the margins. But I think it is a strength in the whole challenge against, these anti-democratic forces. It's a small strength. It's an important strength. So we will survive with that little that we think of ourselves.
Thank you, Kavita. I just wanted her to know that some 25 to 30 students from APU are now going to be located in various organizations in Rajasthan, and they will